I want to tell you about the morning I realized I was invisible, not in some poetic way, in the real way. The way where you walk into a building you've walked into every day for 34 years, and the security guard, the new one, asks you for your badge because he doesn't recognize your face. 34 years in that building, 34 years walking past that desk, saying good morning, and this kid couldn't have been 25, stops me like I'm a stranger off the street. And I showed him my badge, and he waved me through, and I walked to the elevator thinking, that's a sign, Frank. That's the universe telling you something. But I didn't listen. I should have, because 3 weeks later they told me the something themselves. My name is Frank Medeiros. I'm 63 years old, or I was when this story starts. I'm 65 now. And I'm sitting here telling you this from a stone house in a village in central Portugal, a place with maybe 400 people and more olive trees than I could count in a lifetime. And I live here on $1,500 a month, my Social Security check and nothing else. And I'm going to tell you how a man who spent 34 years sorting mail at a distribution center in Newark, New Jersey, ended up 3,000 miles across the ocean in a country his grandparents came from and he'd never seen. And I need to tell it honestly, because the honest version is the only one worth your time. The day they let me go was a Wednesday, March 15th. I remember because my mother, God rest her, always said the Ides of March were bad luck, and I used to laugh at her, and I don't laugh at that anymore. They called me into a room on the third floor that I'd never been in, which should have been my first clue because in 34 years I'd been on every floor of that building except apparently the one where they fire you. There was a woman from HR, young, with a folder, and she had this rehearsed gentleness in her voice, the kind they must teach in a class somewhere, and she told me my position was being eliminated due to operational restructuring. I sorted mail. I sorted it fast and I sorted it right. And I'd been doing it since before this woman was born. And now a machine does it. A machine that doesn't need health insurance or bathroom breaks or holidays or a pension. And I sat there and I nodded and I signed where she pointed. And I walked out of that building for the last time carrying nothing, because in 34 years of working at a place, you don't accumulate things the way you think. You accumulate routine. And they took that, and they didn't even put it in a box for me. I sat in my car in the parking garage, a 2009 Honda Civic with 187,000 miles on it, and I opened my wallet. I always kept a little cash in my wallet, a habit from my father who said a man should always have enough in his pocket to get home. I had $40. I checked my phone for my bank balance. $512 in checking, $0 in savings. 63 years old with $512 and a car that was older than most of the people who still worked in that building. Let me tell you how a man gets to 63 with nothing, because I know that's the question, and I know how it sounds from the outside. From the outside, it sounds like I must have done something wrong. Gambled, drank, been careless. And I want to look you right in the eye through this camera and tell you that I was none of those things. I was careful my whole life. Careful and steady and responsible, or at least I thought I was. What I was, really, was underpaid for 34 years in one of the most expensive parts of the country. And by the time you take out rent in New Jersey and car insurance in New Jersey and property tax in New Jersey And I don't need to tell you what New Jersey costs, because if you know, you know, and if you don't, count your blessings. By the time you take all that out, there's not much left to save. And then Diane, my ex-wife, we were married 18 years, and I have nothing bad to say about her, because the truth is we were both good people who got tired. She left when I was 57 and took what the lawyers said was hers, which turned out to be about half of everything. And when you split half of not much, you've got two people with almost nothing. And my daughter Sophia, who was in nursing school at the time, needed help. She needed money for her clinicals and her boards and her loans. And I helped, because that's what you do when your kid is building something real and you're the only one she can call. I don't regret it. Not 1 cent. But the math doesn't care about your reasons. So there I was, 63 years old, no job, no wife, no savings, a $512 bank account, and a Honda with a check engine light. Living in a one-bedroom apartment in a building off Bloomfield Avenue that I don't want to describe because you already know what it looks like. The carpet's been there since the 80s. The radiator makes a sound like a man dying. The rent was about $350, and that was cheap for the area. And my Social Security, which I'd taken early, because when you've got 512 duln and no income, you don't have the luxury of waiting for the bigger check at 67, came to $1,500 a month. Let me do that math for you out loud, because I did it every night at my kitchen table until the numbers were burned into my brain. Almost $2,500 in, $150 rent. That leaves $150 for food, for gas, for the phone, for health insurance, for everything. $150 for a man's entire life beyond his walls. That's not a budget. That's a slow suffocation. I applied for jobs. I want you to know I tried. I put on my good shirt and I went out and I tried. Grocery stores, warehouses, security guard positions. And what I found out, what every man my age finds out, is that 63 is a number that makes people uncomfortable. They don't say it. They'll never say it. They say things like, we're looking for a long-term fit, or the role requires flexibility with emerging technologies, which is a fancy way of saying you're old and you don't know computers well enough, and please stop applying. I had one interview at a FedEx sorting facility, which is literally what I'd done for 34 years. And the manager looked at my resume and looked at me and said, "You sure you want to be on your feet all day at your age?" At my age, like 63 is a disease. The loneliness was the other thing, the thing underneath the money thing. When you work somewhere for 34 years, your social life is that building, the guys at the break table, the jokes, the complaints, the knowing who's getting divorced and whose kid made the team. When the building goes, all of that goes, and you realize that what you thought was friendship was proximity. Take away the proximity, and what's left? My phone stopped ringing about 2 months after I got let go. I started watching television just to hear voices. I went to the diner on Broad Street and sat at the counter and ordered coffee I couldn't afford because the waitress called me Hon, and for 30 seconds, that was enough human warmth to keep me going. Here's where it turns, and I want to tell it right because the real version is important. I was lying in bed at 2 a.m, doing what I did every night, which was staring at the ceiling doing math I'd already done, and I picked up my phone to make my brain stop. And the algorithm, that little machine that decides what you see, it served me up a video. A guy, American, about my age, sitting on a terrace with white walls and red tile roofs behind him, and he's just talking. And he says he lives in Portugal on his Social Security, and he has money left over. And I almost scrolled past it because I'm from Newark. And in Newark, you learn early that if something sounds too good, it's a con. But I didn't scroll. Something about the light behind him, something about how calm he looked. I watched the whole thing, and then I watched another and another. Americans, Brits, a couple of Canadians, all living in these small towns in Portugal, in the Alentejo and the Algarve and the mountains up north, in houses that cost less than a year of my rent, eating fresh fish and drinking wine that costs $3 a bottle. And they were happy. You could see it. Not the fake happy of a commercial, the real, tired, grateful happy of people who'd been where I was and found their way out. And here's the thing that made it hit different for me. My grandparents, my mother's parents were Portuguese. They came from a village in the Azores in the 1950s and landed in Newark and worked in a factory and raised their kids and never went back. My grandmother, my avó, as we called her, used to talk about the old country the way people talk about heaven, like it was beautiful and lost, and she'd see it again someday. She never did. She died in Newark in 2004. And I grew up hearing Portuguese in the kitchen and eating salt cod on Christmas Eve, and knowing somewhere in my blood that there was a place across the water that was part of me, and I'd never seen it. So when those videos started showing me white villages on hillsides and old men in cafes and blue sky that went on forever, it wasn't just the money. It was something else, something deeper that I can't quite name except to say it felt like recognition. Like looking at a place you've never been and somehow knowing it. I got out a pad of paper and I did what I do, which is the math. Rent in a small village in central Portugal, $350 to $500 a month. Utilities, $60 to $80. Food at the local market, $200 to $300. Healthcare through the public system, minimal once you're a resident. I ran the numbers 5 different ways, and every time the answer came back the same. My $1,500 check, the one that left me $150 after rent in Newark, could actually work in Portugal. Not just survive, work. I'd have a cushion. I'd have money left over. The same check, the same $1,500, and the life on the other end of it was completely different. But knowing the math works and actually going are two different things. Between those two things is a wall of fear so thick you can barely see through it. I'd never left the country. My passport was a thing I didn't have. I was 63 years old and I was going to fly alone to a country I'd never seen because some strangers on my phone at 2 a.m. told me the rent was cheap. The voice in my head had a field day with that one. You're too old, Frank. You're too broke. You don't speak the language. Your daughter needs you nearby. You're a mailman from Newark. You don't do things like this. Mailmen from Newark stay in Newark, and they deal with it. And I want to stop here for a second because there's something I need to tell you about. In those weeks when I was stuck, when the numbers said go and the voice said stay, and I was paralyzed between the two, I found something that cracked the wall. It was a book called You Were Never Meant to Stay. And the title alone, I'm going to tell you, the title alone made me sit down hard. Because the voice in my head was saying, stay. Stay and suffer. Stay and be responsible. Stay and eat at the diner counter for the rest of your life. And here was this book saying, you were never meant to. It wasn't about Portugal. It was about the fear and the guilt and that deep feeling that the life you're stuck in isn't the one you were supposed to live. And reading it in that apartment on Bloomfield Avenue with the dying radiator, it was like somebody had written down the inside of my head and then said, now let it go. I'll leave a link in the description because I think somebody watching this needs it the way I needed it. My daughter Sophia changed my mind. She came over one Sunday, brought groceries because she'd figured out I wasn't eating enough. And I told her, I said, Soph, I'm thinking about going to Portugal. And she put the grocery bag down and she looked at me and she didn't say, are you crazy? She said, Dad, Grandma would have wanted this. And then she said, you've been gray, Dad. You've been gray for years. Go see if it's real. Go see where they came from. And hearing my grandmother invoked like that, like a blessing from a woman who never got to go back, it broke something loose in me that all the math in the world couldn't have moved. I'm going to skip ahead because you don't need to hear about the passport line and the packing. You need to hear about what happened when I got there. I landed in Lisbon on a Tuesday in May. I stepped out of the airport into the light, and the first thing that hit me, the absolute first thing, was the smell. The air in Lisbon smells like the ocean and stone and coffee and something sweet. Maybe the custard tarts they sell on every corner. And I stood there on the sidewalk and I breathed in, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, the air itself felt like a gift. I took a bus south, and then a smaller bus, and then what I can only describe as a van that stopped wherever people waved at it, and I ended up in a village in the Alentejo. I'm not going to name it because it's small, and these people didn't ask to be on the internet. It's in the rolling hills south of the Tagus River. Cork trees and olive groves and white houses with blue trim and cobblestone streets so narrow 2 people can barely pass each other. The village has maybe 400 people. There's a church at the top of the hill with a bell that rings at noon and 6. There's a cafe on the square where the old men sit all day drinking coffee and arguing about football, which is soccer, and don't make the mistake I made of calling it soccer to their faces. There's a small market run by a woman named Dona Fatima, who knows everyone and everything and will tell you both whether you asked or not. The first morning I walked to the cafe and sat down, and a man about my age, weathered face, flat cap, looked at me and said something in Portuguese that I didn't understand. And I said very slowly, the one sentence I'd practiced on the plane, I'm sorry, I don't speak much Portuguese. I said it in Portuguese, the one sentence I'd memorized, and I probably butchered it. And the man laughed, not at me, but with genuine delight. And he said in rough English, you speak enough, sit, coffee. His name is Manuel. He's a retired farmer. He has hands like shovels and a laugh like a thunderclap, and he decided on that first morning that I was his project. 2 years later, we have coffee together every single day. He corrects my Portuguese. I teach him English curse words which he finds hilarious, and we watch the square and we talk about nothing the way old men are supposed to and never get to in America, because in America everybody's too busy being busy. The numbers. Let me give you the real numbers because I know that's why a lot of you are here. I found an apartment, a small stone house really, a small stone cottage, 1 bedroom, a living area with a fireplace, a kitchen with a gas stove, a bathroom, and a little patio with a grape vine growing over it that produces actual grapes that I actually eat. The rent is $400 a month. That's about $430. My apartment in Newark was $1,350 for a box with a dying radiator. Electric, about $40 a month, because I barely need heat in winter and there's no air conditioning because there doesn't need to be. The stone walls keep the house cool in summer in a way that felt like magic the first time I noticed it. Water, $15. Internet, good fiber internet that works better than what I had in New Jersey, $30. Phone, $15 with a local SIM. Gas for cooking, $10 a month. One small canister lasts forever. So my whole housing and utilities number is about $540. In Newark, rent alone was $1,350 food. This is where I have to be careful because I'm going to sound like I'm exaggerating, and I'm not. I go to the market every morning, Dona Fatima's market, and I buy what's fresh. A kilo of tomatoes that were in the ground that morning for about $1.50. Bread baked that day for 80 cents. A piece of fish from the coast for $3 or $4. A bottle of wine, local red, for $2.50. And it's better than anything I ever bought for $15 back home. Olive oil from somebody's trees for almost nothing. Cheese, fruit. I eat 3 meals a day. I eat well. I eat fresh food that actually tastes like food is supposed to taste. And my monthly grocery bill is about $250 when I eat out at the local tavern. A full meal with wine is $8 to $10. Healthcare. Portugal has a public health system. As a legal resident, I'm enrolled in it. I have a health center about 20 minutes away by bus. I've seen a doctor 3 times, once for a bad cough, once for a checkup, once because I cut my hand on a cork tree like an idiot. Each visit was either free or a couple of euros. My medications, blood pressure, and cholesterol cost me about $8 a month total. $8. Those same medications were costing me $180 a month in New Jersey with the discount card. Total monthly. Housing, $540, food $250, eating out $80, health $15, transportation $40, everything else $200. Grand total about $125. My check is $500. I have $375 left over every month, $375 that just sits there. After years of the number going the wrong way, after years of watching my account drop to double digits by the 20th of every month, I have money left. And that first month when I closed my notebook and the number was positive, I sat on my little patio under the grapevine and I drank a glass of that $2 or $2.50 wine, and I listened to the church bell ring 6 o'clock and I cried. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind that comes when something you've been holding for a very long time finally lets go. But I promised you the honest version, and the honest version includes the hard parts. The bureaucracy will test your soul. Getting residency papers in Portugal involves a level of patience that I did not previously possess. You will stand in line at the SEF office, the immigration office, for hours. You will bring every document they ask for, and they will ask for one more that wasn't on the list. You will come back the next day, and a different person will tell you you need a different thing. You will learn that the word for tomorrow is the national answer to every question. It took me 4 months to get my paperwork sorted, and I aged about 4 years in the process. And the silence. In a village of 400 people, the nights are quiet in a way that city people aren't prepared for. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbor's TV through the wall, just absolute silence and the occasional dog and the wind in the olive trees. The first few nights it kept me awake because the silence was louder than any noise I'd ever heard. My brain didn't know what to do without the sound of Newark around it. And I had a moment, I'll admit it, about 2 weeks in, where I stood in my kitchen at midnight and thought, Frank, you have made a terrible mistake. You are alone in a village, in a country where you understand about 30% of what anyone says, and you have no friends and no plan, and if something happens to you tonight, nobody will know until Manuel notices you're not at the cafe tomorrow. That was the lowest moment. That was the floor. But here's the thing about the floor. You can't fall through it. And the next morning I went to the cafe, and Manuel was there, and he pushed a coffee toward me and said, you look tired, my friend. Bad night? And I said, oh, yes. And he said, they get better. And he was right. They got better. I need to tell you about the mistakes because some of them are funny and all of them are true. I went to the market my first week and tried to ask for fruit preserves. The Portuguese word I used was preservativos. I thought it meant preserves. It does not. It means condoms. I asked a 70-year-old woman in a village market for condoms. She stared at me for about 3 seconds, and then she howled with laughter so loud that 2 other women came running from the back, and she told them, and they all laughed until they were crying. And I stood there, the color of a Portuguese tomato, wanting the cobblestones to swallow me whole. She still calls me the condom boy in Portuguese. I will never live it down, and honestly, I don't want to, because it's the story that made me a person in that village instead of a stranger. And the coffee. Portuguese coffee is served in a tiny cup, a tiny espresso cup, and it is approximately the strength of jet fuel. The first time I drank one, I was vibrating for 4 hours. I tried to order a large coffee, an American-sized coffee, and the man at the cafe looked at me with genuine pity, like I'd just admitted to a crime. Something happened that I have to tell you about, because I promised the whole truth. About a year in, I started spending time with a woman named Clara. She's Portuguese, born in the village, left for Lisbon as a young woman, came back after her husband died to be near her family. She's 58. She runs a small ceramics workshop out of her garage. She paints plates and tiles with these traditional blue and white tile patterns, and they're beautiful. And the first time I saw them, I said so, and she looked at me like she was trying to decide if I meant it, and I did, and she knew I did. She started teaching me a few words of Portuguese every time I came by, which was more and more often, and I started finding excuses to walk past her workshop, and eventually she just started leaving the door open when she knew I'd be walking by. We're both old enough to know what that means without having to say it. I didn't come here for this. I came here because the rent in Newark was killing me. But when you stop surviving and start living, living has a way of handing you things you'd stopped believing in. I fly home once a year. I spend 3 weeks with Sophia and my grandson Lucas, and I'm present for those 3 weeks in a way I never was when I lived 20 minutes away, because I'm not tired and I'm not worried and I'm not counting every dollar between me and the end of the month. Sophia told me last time, she said, "Dad, you're you again. I forgot what you sounded like when you weren't scared." When you weren't scared, that's what my daughter noticed. Not that I was tanned or thinner or spoke some Portuguese. She noticed that the fear was gone from my voice. That alone was worth every mile. I want to talk to whoever's watching this, who's where I was, and I think there are a lot of you. More than anybody admits, 60, 63, 67 years old, let go or retired with not enough, doing the math at the kitchen table that never closes, eating at the diner counter for the human contact, lying awake at 2 a.m., doing numbers in your head, and underneath all of it, the shame, because you did everything right. You showed up, you sorted the mail, you raised the kid, you paid the rent, and the deal still broke. And I need to tell you that the deal breaking was not your fault. The math just stopped working in that country for regular people. And taking your check somewhere it works is not running away. It's the smartest, bravest, most clear-eyed thing you can do. And that thing I mentioned earlier, the book, You Were Never Meant to Stay, if anything in my story sat heavy, in your chest. If you felt that recognition, that ache of hearing your own story in somebody else's words, I'd say pick it up. I'll leave the link below. It understood the knot in my chest before I had words for it. And sometimes understanding is the first step through the door. I'm sitting on my patio as I tell you this. The grapevine is heavy with fruit. The church bell just rang noon. Clara brought me a plate she painted blue and white with a little fish on it because she says I eat too much fish, and if I'm going to eat it, I should at least eat it off something beautiful. Manuel will be at the cafe at 3, and we'll argue about Benfica versus Sporting, and neither of us will win, and that's the whole point. My notebook is on the table. The numbers add up. They add up and there's room left over, and the room left over is what a life is made of. My grandmother never got to come back. She used to say, one day, always one day, and one day never came for her. It came for me. 63 years old, $512 in the bank, a mailman from Newark, and I'm sitting in the sun in the country my grandmother dreamed about, eating grapes from my own vine. She would have liked that. I think she knows. Come sit in the square sometime. I'll buy you a coffee. Fair warning, it's small and it's strong, and it'll change your life. Just don't ask the market lady for preserves. Trust me on that one.